Welcome to episode 386 of the Reformed Brotherhood. I'm Jesse.
And I'm Tony, and we are proud members of the Society of Reformed Podcasters.
If the sky comes falling down for you, there's nothing in this world I wouldn't do.
Hey, brother.
Hey, brother. Is it possible that we're closing out a series on this episode? Or are we like faux closing out a series? Penultimate or ultimate?
I think it depends. It's probably the penultimate.
You just never know with us.
It's true. It's true. We never know with us either. So that's probably why it's hard to know with us, because we don't even know what we're doing.
We're included in that. Of course, we're still talking about the armor of God. That sounds like we should be moved on by now. And there's many ways no moving on from this topic, but still so much good stuff. But we're getting near the end of the explicit passage that Paul is using to describe what it means to put on Christ. He uses this lovely analogical language of armor. So you can meet us there in just a hot little minute. But before we get there and keep that discussion going, let's start a new discussion about things we're affirming with and denying against. And as in the past, I'm always curious which one you'd like to begin with.
I can start with my affirmation, since it should be relatively quick, and actually relatively quick, not the relatively quick we usually say, and then talk for 20 minutes. So my lovely wife, who is your little sister, and I think this is the first time I'm announcing it on the show, actually. We are expecting a second child.
Congratulations.
We have known about it for quite some time, obviously, but we're expecting a second child, and we are moving into our first owned home starting in just under a month here, which is crazy. The only downside to all of this is that I don't have a lot of space for my books. So my affirmation is really more of a shameless advertisement that I am selling a large portion of my theological library with the hope of converting most of what I need into Logos resources. So I have a ton of books that are up for sale. The list isn't even fully complete yet. But if you're interested, you can go to bit.ly, so bit.ly/TArsenalBooks, all one word. And that'll bring you to a Google spreadsheet that has a list of all the books. I'm going to probably go back through once I get the list complete and add authors, because right now it's just the titles and the ISBNs. And the way I'm running it, there's a little Google form link in the top of the spreadsheet. You just click on that and fill out the form indicating which books you would like, and like your address and your payment method and all that stuff. That gets filed in, so it comes in time-stamped order. So if two people happen to want the same book, I'll just give it to whoever got it first. And the way that I'm pricing things, in case people are curious, is everything is listed at 75% of Amazon's current list value. If you buy a second book, then you'll get an additional 5% off, so both books will be 70%. And if you buy a third book or more, you'll get an additional 5%. So both books, all of those books will be 65% off. I'm taking care of the shipping costs as part of that. So if you're interested, it would really help me out. I would really love for these books to go to a good home. Otherwise they're going to end up probably just going to some used book service that's going to pay me pennies on the dollar. And who knows what happens with them. But I would really much rather that people who are part of the Reformed Brotherhood community or other kind of groups that I'm a part of, I would really rather that they have the opportunity to pick up a book at a lower price. Most of them are in basically new condition. I only recently started marking in my own books, so there's a few of them that have some highlighting and a few of them that have some notes, but the vast majority of them are basically in new condition. So yeah, if you wanted to look, it's bit.ly/TArsenalBooks. And they're already starting to go. So take a look. There's lots of good titles on there. Again, there's going to be more. And as I'm able to convert some of my bigger books and multi-volume sets into Logos, so think Brockle and Turretin and Bavink, the multi-volume sets. As I'm starting to be able to convert some of those into Logos, I will then begin to put those multi-volume sets up. I'll probably sell those as full multi-volume sets rather than individual volumes. But keep an eye on it. If you've already bought something, then check back in a little bit because there's more books being added and there's going to be more going up there as we go. But again, it's bit.ly/TArsenalBooks.
There you go. We got to get you pumped about how you advertise this, because what you should have said is, first of all, everything's 25% off the marked price, the retail price with free shipping. And if you happen to purchase a book that has your notes in it, that's 110% of the offer price.
What's really funny is I had one member of the Brotherhood already bought a book, and I made a joke about how I have an embosser. So some of my books have like from the library of Tony Arsenal embossed in the front. I was like, if you want, I could. He made a joke about signing it. I was like, I guess I could emboss this one. It's not embossed. He's like, why don't you go ahead and do that? So, and someone else in the group was like, well, it's nice to know like where you got a book and what was going on in the world and in your life when you got it. So yeah, I don't know that ups the resale value or anything. I kind of like when I've gotten books, like when I've bought a used book and it's got like a stamp in the front that's like from the library of such and such
I like it.
person. It's kind of nice to know that the book has like a history and a trajectory, and yeah.
Exactly. It was well loved. Somebody processed it. They felt that they cared enough about what they were doing to put some notes in it. I never mind that, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, unless I suppose like the book is really, really marked up, but I've rarely seen a book that's so marked up it's unreadable
Yeah.
or unenjoyable. So, and by the way, because this is a cognizable book sale, don't go to arsenalbooks.com. That's not you. That's somebody else also selling books, but not you.
I mean, if you want to buy books from them too, I suppose that's fine. But yep, T Arsenal Books, bit.ly/T Arsenal Books will bring you to the spreadsheet. If you go anywhere besides a simple Google spreadsheet, then you know you've gotten to the wrong place. My marketing is bad. My online seller portal is just a spreadsheet and a Google form. So I invest my expertise into other things besides this. But yeah, it would really help me out if those books go. I don't have a lot of time to move them. So if you're interested, please go take a look and hopefully we can get them sold.
Come on, everybody, adopt a book. These books need new homes. We can't just send them out into the cold, hard world. Take them into your loving care at 25% off the retail price, free shipping at Tony Arsenal Books.
It's true. It's true. Jesse is now my marketing manager.
I love this. I'm looking at the list myself. So
yeah, I'm going to get the authors up there because I know some of the books are kind of ambiguous and it's hard to tell like what's worth buying, what's worth looking at. I will admit there's some books in there that I probably would not necessarily purchase full price, but they're all great books. They've all served a purpose in my own theological formation, some in positive ways and some in polemical ways. But yeah, it would be really a great thing if we could get a lot of those books sold. So check it out. Jesse, I always get stuck on these kinds of things. I'm just going to keep saying, check it out until you save me. So could you save me and tell me what your affirmation is?
Check it out. Mine also, not surprisingly, is book related. It's the perfect complement to what you just affirmed. You and I are people of the book, and the books. We just love books. I think we've remarked, at least I think I have, half jokingly or tongue in cheek, wouldn't it be great if you could just get paid to read? Turns out my dream is coming partially true in a little place that I've just been made aware of. It's in Colorado. I think it's Fort Collins, Colorado. There's a bookstore called Paralandra Bookshops where they have now a reader in residence who commits to reading at the store for 2 hours per week in exchange for a small coffee and book stipend. So apparently the reader in residence commitment is a 3-month period, and you get $50 of a book allowance in the store and access to their wholesale catalog, and $50 for coffee. I would honestly do this for much less, but I think this is a really super fun idea. And the whole premise of it is to get somebody in the store, it's apparently a small little bookstore, to get somebody in the store to be there reading. It's an experiment and forcing people to take time away from everything else and to actually come to a place surrounded by books, to open up a book, to have a good hot beverage, and then just to enjoy the reading experience in like a totally different setting, or at least a setting where we're separated from information and from scrolling, just to enjoy words on a page. I love this idea. So I'm affirming with this tiny little bookstore doing this. It's not scalable, but who cares? It's really super fun. If I lived in that community, you better believe I'd be making application for this because it just is super fun.
I'm trying to decide if it's cost effective to move there. So they just pay you, they just give you $50 in merchandise and $50 in coffee
Yes.
per month
Yes.
for 2 hours a week.
Yes.
That is like, that's a pretty good deal.
It's not bad, right? And
Yeah.
I think the whole premise is it's just fun too. It gets you in the store. It gives them a little press, I guess. And I suppose you can say when people come in, like, see that person reading over there? That's our reader in residence.
Yeah.
Shh, please don't
Does
disrupt.
does this person have other responsibilities? Like, do they need to make recommendations to people?
No, so that's the thing. So that's what makes it, it's just like pure joy of reading. So I'm actually looking at an article that is from the Colorado Sun, who reported on this. And to quote the article, it says, the reader in residence doesn't have to write an essay. They don't have to host a book club or moderate a panel discussion. They don't have to contribute to a blog or create sponsored content. They don't have to do anything except show up to the bookstore a couple of times per week and read.
Wow, that's a pretty good deal.
It's clever, right?
I'm about to call my local bookstore and be like, you guys should innovate, or you should not innovate. It's the opposite of innovate. You guys should adopt this model and I will be your first person to do it.
Yeah, I think this is, honestly, I really love this idea. It's so creative, so fun, so different. And you and I think both have a love for independent bookstores. So
Yeah.
it's great to see someplace like this just doing something different and trying to draw a little bit of interest in their store. There's some pictures. You can go, everybody can go out and find this article of the store. It's like super quaint and looks amazing. They have reading chairs and little reading nooks. Reading nooks are the best.
I
So
love reading nooks.
yeah, I'm pro this idea. I think it's fantastic. So maybe what's like, I don't know what the equivalent kind of thing we could all do, but I love this idea. And you and I talked about this a lot, just like empowering people to get connected to books. Wait a second, it just happened. You need to go to Tony's book list to buy a bunch of books at a discount. It's basically the same thing. You could be your own reader in residence
It's
for
true.
a discounted price.
It's true. You could be a reader in residence at your house,
Right.
where you literally
Actually,
reside.
maybe what people don't know is, oh, we should probably get into this now so people aren't surprised. This episode does have a sponsor. It's brought to you by Tony Arsenal Books.
The funny thing is, I was at a conference today in Massachusetts, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But I was at a conference and I brought my little. I'll show Jesse. This is the worst podcasting ever. I made like this little QR code thing with this little link on it, and I got there and it looks exactly like the QR code and the like display thing they had at the P&R book table. And I was like, I should just slide this right on top of that.
Swap it out.
Yeah, just swap it out. And I was like, that's not honest. That's not good. So so I did it.
That is no good. Books good. That swap, no good. All right. So let's get into then. Is your denial going to factor into this?
It is, but not because I didn't like the conference. The conference was great. It's just that every year I'd go to the local regional ETS conference. I'm a big fan of the Evangelical Theological Society, even though there are a lot of people in the Evangelical Theological Society that I would not say that I appreciate too much. But the concept of the ETS, and especially my region, there are a lot of great regional conferences that people could get involved in. And I think they would all benefit if more Reformed people were involved in those conferences. I think Reformed folks tend to avoid those conferences. But none of that has anything to do with my denial. Only in that the occasion of me having to be exposed to this thing was that I was in Massachusetts. I was just reminded today how terrible the roads and the planning in Massachusetts are, at least in that part of Massachusetts, kind of on the North Shore of Boston. I forgot, we used to live there. I forgot how terrible the roads are. There's one spot where literally you pull up to a stop sign and then you turn right onto the freeway. There's no ramp. There's nothing.
I know exactly where you're at.
It's just you better hope that your car has enough get up and go. So much so that when I got there and I saw this spot when I was coming into the town, and I had like all sorts of like PTSD over this spot. I actually drove an extra 15 minutes out of my way to get on the freeway at a different spot that actually had an on-ramp.
I respect that.
I understand why they developed this way. These roads were kind of like, they were built off of like the existing pathways, and there's all sorts of like inlets of the ocean and stuff that makes it hard to plan this stuff. But yeah, there's multiple places where basically you just turn right onto a 2-lane 60-mile-an-hour highway and it's not like it's a country highway where there's not a lot of people. Like there's a lot of traffic. So you basically have to cut someone off to get onto the freeway, which is never a great thing. And then in that part of Massachusetts, people are just really like angry, aggressive drivers. So I guess I'm just denying the Massachusetts freeway system and all of the people who drive on it.
If you know, you know, right?
It's true.
Boston was never meant to be a navigable place,
No.
especially not by motor vehicle. So it is insane. And probably like many people, I've driven in lots of cities in the Northeast, Philly, Pittsburgh, New York. Boston is by far the worst, the most adventurous. And even if you get comfortable, really you're just getting comfortable with the adventure. And you get this, I think you're going to know what I'm talking about. You kind of get this collective vibe as how to drive, meaning in that case, I know that we can't even call it an on-ramp. I know that right turn onto the freeway.
Yeah.
You just have to go and
Mhm.
trust that everybody else is understanding exactly what's happening in that moment. There really is no other option. If you are timid, then that's actually worse than going with all your gusto when
Yeah.
you just look to the left and see, I've got a small opening. You just have to take it. Otherwise, you'll be there forever. And if you do this kind of like, am I going? Am I not? Am I coming? That is like way more dangerous, as shocking as it sounds.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually, it's been a while since I've been in Boston for more than like a day long conference or something like that. There's almost like a flock kind of mentality on the road.
Yes.
Like a bird flock or a school of fish where they all move together at the same time, but there's no direct communication. Like honestly, the traffic is like that in those areas. And it's really hard when you're not part of that, like part of the school, to know how to do that. It's bad. Cause like your brother went to school at Gordon, and then obviously your sister went to Gordon Conwell. So you've been in the area. It's just a rough place to drive. And this is like a second or maybe third ring suburb of Boston that we're talking about. It's not even like Boston proper or the busy part of Boston. It's just all over that area is really, really rough. So it was fine. I'm alive. Nobody ran into my car. I didn't run into anybody. But I'm just denying that Boston traffic patterns. They're terrible.
It's just a totally different thing. And I think every city is a bit like that. So I'm sure people are thinking, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's just a different kind of adventure. And I used to have a job that took me into Boston with some regularity. And I didn't look forward to those days. Plus, like, every other thing in an urban area, the parking is crazy. It is, you just have to go, you have to make a way, you have to trust. Even when we drive through places like New Jersey, there's like a different code to the road.
Yep.
And it's basically like, as long as you're not being downright dangerous, just do your thing.
Yeah.
So like most people are not defensive drivers in those places, but they're defensive in their own way. It's kind of like we all have an accord with each other.
Yeah. They're
And
offensive drivers.
it's like, it's based on agreement. We're all going to be offensive as long as we're not putting each other in like grave danger or mortal peril.
Yeah.
And then there's always that one person who's flying all over the place who just doesn't care.
Yeah. The other thing about Boston or Massachusetts driving that I hate, we call it the courtesy left. Do you know what I'm talking about? So one of the main roads near the seminary, it's a 2-lane. It's an undivided 2-lane road. And it's very busy, and there's no turn lanes for the businesses and whatnot. And it also is busy enough that turning out of one of those businesses onto the road is sometimes difficult. And people will literally just stop in the middle of the road to allow you to turn left. But it's the people who are coming from your right, so you're turning into their lane in front of them. They will often stop to allow you to go in, but you have to cross the traffic lane to do that. The people coming from your left often do not realize that those people have stopped, and it's just bad news. And I don't really understand why people do it. I mean, I guess it's like the one thing that people in Boston do to try to be nice on the road is to like give you this courtesy left, but it is so ridiculously dangerous. So I don't know. I always just turn right and then go down a ways and turn into a parking lot and come back and go about the other way. I never turn left in that kind of traffic. So
yeah, I'm with you. I think everybody probably lives in a place where they have those kind of things they do, where you got to be. So I know I've just done that recently. Actually, there's a particular stretch of road that's really convoluted and congested at a particular time of day. I knew I was going to have to make a left-hand turn. And I was like, there's no way I'm making this turn in any reasonable period of time. And beyond that, the people behind me are just going to be so angry.
Yeah.
Even though it's like, I can't do anything. So yeah, I just approached it from the other direction and made a nice little right in there. I'm sure we all do that kind of thing. It's funny, isn't it? How we orient our lives around these things, which seem like small inconveniences, but sometimes kind of grow into bigger stresses.
Yeah.
And travel can be one of those things for me, especially if it's like navigating a vehicle in like a really urban or congested unknown area, or just a place where, again, anybody's been to Boston, you cannot navigate that city. It was definitely not built to be navigated in that way.
No.
And like you said, it was just kind of heaped up on itself. So I'm sure there are places like that all over the world, especially much older cities than that. So I'm with you. It's an adventure. It's kind of thing you do and you're like, all right, I'm going to brace this. We're going to go with the crowd. I'm just going to do it. And then you get home and you're like, we did it. Like, there's like this sense of pride.
You're like,
We
I'm
survived.
still alive. And that's a good
conquered.
thing. Yeah, we did it.
Makes you feel alive.
Well, Jesse, speaking of doing it, what is your denial today?
So mine is a little bit more. I thought yours was going to be, I really thought it was going to be some kind of theological denial of some sort. I really
could
thought
do another denial. I always have some theological thing I could deny.
I mean, that's fine. I just thought because of the conference, I was like, here we go. We're going to get into it. So allow me then to bring one up. And this is this is the kind of thing that you read and you just think, what? And so I came across this post, which apparently was on Facebook. I myself, not on the Book of Face, but this came along to me because several people have quoted it, or I've seen it kind of posted in a lot of other blogs. And it is a quote about abortion, but not in the way that you would think. And let me just read it and get your honest assessment on this. Apparently, it's from something that actually was really written in June 2018 by somebody named Dave Barnhart, who's a Methodist pastor. And it's just a paragraph, but let me read it in full. This is what he writes. The unborn are a convenient group of people to advocate for. They never make demands of you. They're morally uncomplicated, unlike the incarcerated, addicted, or the chronically poor. They don't resent your condescension or complain that you are not politically correct. Unlike widows, they don't ask you to question patriarchy. Unlike orphans, they don't need money, education, or childcare. Unlike aliens, they don't bring all that racial, cultural, and religious baggage that you dislike. They allow you to feel good about yourself without any work at creating or maintaining relationships. And when they are born, you can forget about them because they cease to be unborn. It's almost as if by being born, they have died to you. You can love the unborn and advocate for them without substantially challenging your own wealth, power, or privilege, without reimagining social structures, apologizing, or making reparations to anyone. They are, in short, the perfect people to love if you want to claim you love Jesus, but actually dislike people who breathe. Prisoners, immigrants, the sick, the poor, widows, orphans, all the groups that are specifically mentioned in the Bible, they all get thrown under the bus for the unborn, unquote.
Yeah.
That's some nonsense, right?
It's some bad nonsense. Yeah. Yeah. I don't even know where to start. I mean, I suppose like the biggest thing to start is I don't know anyone who is, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. I don't know anyone who has like a primary ministry in fighting abortion who is also not someone who is a major advocate for and oftentimes has adopted multiple children. So this whole idea that like people only care about the unborn, anti-abortion advocates only care about the unborn until they become born is just a silly, stupid argument. It doesn't bear the facts. It doesn't bear, if we want to talk about convenient arguments, that's a convenient argument.
Yes.
But I would challenge the people who post this kind of thing to actually identify. And this is just a good principle when you're debating anybody about anything. When they talk about some sort of like straw man position, ask them to identify a specific person who actually embodies that critique, right? So this person, rather than have some nameless, faceless group of anti-abortion advocates or activists who also don't care about the unborn, show me an actual person who is an anti-abortion advocate who also is not in favor of living children and would not and has not taken steps to try to improve the lives of those who are living in some sort of poverty. And the other element of that is that just because someone focuses on one thing and doesn't focus on another thing doesn't mean that that other thing is irrelevant to them. And on top of that, I don't want to like put a specific statistic out there because I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but the number of unborn children that are being killed by abortion every year is astronomically high. And it dwarfs the number of kids who are dying related to poverty or dying related to childhood sickness. It just absolutely dwarfs those things in comparison. So if the argument is basically like you are only focusing on a relatively irrelevant amount of life that's being lost to the exclusion of this other mass of life that is being affected, that's just a poor argument on the face of the numbers. So yeah, I mean, that's like actually like just a ridiculously offensive argument, not in the sense of like, I'm offended because I'm like, it's not like I'm in this picture and I don't like it. It's offensive because like, how stupid do you think the people you're presenting this argument
Right.
to? It's just offensive that you would think people are that dumb and that blinded by things. The only people who, I'm going to say this is maybe a little bit outlandish, but I guess I don't have a lot of pity for people who are in favor of killing babies. The only people who are stupid enough to buy your argument are the people who already buy your argument.
Right.
Like, you're not convincing anyone by being like, oh, you don't actually care for little kids who are poor and hungry. You just care about the unborn. Of course we care about little kids who are hungry. Like,
Right.
if we had the ability and the opportunity to feed a kid who was hungry, we would absolutely do that. And I don't know if I want to get into the whole idea of like, let's pity the incarcerated. Like, they usually became incarcerated for a reason. There are lots of complex social dynamics. I'm not saying everybody who is incarcerated that there are not social justice issues that maybe need to be addressed in communities, but people generally speaking are in jail because they've committed some sort of crime. There are very few people who are, and I'm not even sure how you would prove this, but there are very few people in jail right now that absolutely are innocent and are falsely accused and falsely convicted 100%. So I get there are other complicated factors and I don't want to get into that, but I just think this as a whole is like, it's a lot of like hand waving. The technical term is a tu quoque fallacy,
Right.
which is like, instead of actually addressing the argument, you actually point at some other element of like, well, but your argument doesn't approach this. So yeah, that's a janky quote. I kind of want to say a bad word in relation to that doesn't happen to me too often, where I struggle not to be aggressive and a little bit vulgar, but I'm not sure what else you could call something like that.
That's what struck me about it as well. That's why I wanted to bring it up, is it almost took me as a novel approach because one, it's wrapping up all of this argumentation in, hey, the reason why you all care about the unborn is because it's super convenient for you to do that. And you're forsaking all other responsibilities, as opposed to going to the gospel, which exalts all life because God is the giver of all life. Not to mention, logically, you might push back on this author and say things like, well, prisoners, immigrants, the sick, the poor, orphans, widows, guess which groups you don't have if they're all killed in the womb?
Yeah.
None of those groups. So this is like of primacy, and it doesn't mean that we're forsaking all the other responsibilities. And also, I don't know how you feel about this, but this is the kind of thing that I think if I were sitting across from this person, I want to ask, what is really going on? Because this is really almost ad hominem too. It's really coming after the person who basically supports or feels that the unborn has some kind of right, and saying that by espousing that worldview, you are being lazy, and that really you should be affecting change for other people that are actually alive, which necessitates then a ranking of life, which is theoretically the exact thing he's arguing against.
Yeah.
So this does seem to be very biting. And of course, to me, it's all the more tragic that it comes from somebody who is at least a self-disclosed pastor. So this is, again, I think the where I found this was somebody essentially posting this as leverage for, hey, here's a religious person saying that you people who are religious, who care about the unborn, are ridiculous. And that really you're not honoring the gospel. So that sentence to say, it's a way for you to claim that you love Jesus without actually doing anything because you dislike people who are actually alive. To your point, who said that?
Yeah.
So there's a lot more here, but it's amazing to me how this just got kind of wrapped up. It got this like really thin coating of like gospel veneers of like, this is a self-righteous, like an actual righteous position, when actually it's self-righteous.
Yeah.
The whole thing is so fraught. It definitely collapses on itself. But to your point, I've seen it circulated quite a bit recently. And so, of course, people gravitate towards this because they think there's some great truth. They think there's like a gotcha moment in here, but there isn't. This is just straight nonsense.
Well, and there is a gotcha moment, but it's not the one they think it is, right? This is one of those you're saying the quiet part out loud thing, but they don't realize it. So their argument basically is like this group of people, this group that you're defending, the scare quote unborn, you're elevating that group of people over this group of people. Well, this is a catch-22 for the anti-life position, right? Either you've now acknowledged that the unborn are people who are being murdered in the womb, in which case, why are you elevating all these other groups over them? Or
Right.
you've just gone ahead and acknowledged that your position is that those aren't people.
Exactly.
Right? The only relevant fact in the discussion about abortion, the only relevant fact is whether or not the thing that is being torn apart or chemically terminated in a woman's womb in a pregnancy is a human being or not, a human person. That's the only relevant fact. And if it's not, if it really is just a clump of cells or a bit of tissue, then there really isn't any other argument that needs to be made. Like if it's just a tissue equivalent to a tumor or a bit of extra fat that gets liposectioned out or something like that, then this argument that this person is making is totally irrelevant. It's not necessary, right? So either the person is acknowledging that this is a human person that is being terminated in the womb and murdered, in which case he would need to argue and justify why we should not elevate again, horizontally speaking, a relatively innocent life that has done nothing and hurt nobody, why we would elevate other groups of people who in many cases have done things and have hurt people. Why would we elevate those people in terms of our prioritization? This strikes me as like, I'm just going to go full bore on this.
Here we go.
This strikes me as like somebody who would be like, like the Jews are a really convenient group of people because they're all the way over in Europe, and like it doesn't cost you anything to say that Hitler shouldn't kill them. Like that costs you nothing. It doesn't challenge your prestige. All this nonsense, mentally speaking, there is no personal sin that has been committed, and there is no offense against any other human that has been committed by an unborn child. So this is just a nonsense, silly argument from the pit of hell, and people who make this argument do not know Jesus Christ. Like they just do not know the Lord of life if they're willing to just disregard life like this. And that might feel like a strong statement, and this is not a subject we have approached on the show, and some of that is just because this is a show that's predominantly a systematic theology and at times a biblical studies show. We don't engage in a lot of cultural commentary, but that doesn't mean we don't have strong biblical and at times, I think, somewhat aggressive feelings and arguments against this kinds of evil. So people might be surprised to hear me say that, but I have no qualms with saying that somebody who is going to advocate for abortion in any sort of fashion is not a follower of Jesus Christ. They are arguing for something that shows that they do not know the author of life when they are willing to engage in an activity that requires the authorship of death to do. It just is, that's just a fact. And I have no problem saying that.
Right on. Yeah, there's a lot of weak sauce in that writing. I thought that it would be something good for us to talk about. Maybe sometime we should come back to that as a full episode. We can talk more about that and why we may have those strong convictions. We've got opinions and convictions, loved ones. And you're right. I guess there are times that we don't hesitate to express those or moving through systematic theology, but we often don't do those kind of topical episodes where we might reflect on something that's happening in the zeitgeist of the culture and bring to bear what we think the scriptures have us say, and then our convictions within our affirmation of how the scripture teaches. Yeah. Maybe that would be a good thing for us to do. If you want to hear that, you can email us at info@reformedbrotherhood.com, or when you make your order for one of the T Arsenal books, you can just make a quick note that that's something that you would like us to do. Keep in mind that they, again, please, loved ones, they are the sponsor of this episode. So speaking of which, our sponsor would want us to get to the topic at hand, and that is the latter part of Ephesians 6. And because we're approaching the end of that passage, and because this, as with all passages, needs to have a context, let me just read beginning in chapter 6, verse 13, just until the part, I guess we're going down to 18, 19. 18. Yes. We're not going to get to 19.
Just like the first four words of 19.
Everybody calm down. We're not getting into 19 yet. All right. So let me read. I'm reading from the NASB 95 because it's great. Beginning of verse 13. Therefore, take up the full armor of God so that you will be able to resist in the evil day, and having done everything, to stand firm. Stand firm, therefore, having girded your loins with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. In addition to all, taking up the shield of faith with which you'll be able to extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. With all prayer and petition, pray at all times in the Spirit. And with this in view, be on the alert with all perseverance and petition for all the saints. So that is where, again, there's this amazing buildup. Like we're running this ramp, we're about to take off, and we get to this phrase and have this petition for all the saints. And we've talked a little bit before about prayer, but I think what I found in this whole series, especially in this verse 18, which is summarizing the practical application, I'd say putting on the shoe leather, but Paul already has that covered. Like in the first opening verses I read there, he actually relates to something different. This is about, okay, we've talked about this more than just analogical language, more than just symbology. This armor is putting on Christ, or Christ being put on you rather. And then in addition to that, there's all of this now about, well, how does this come into play? How do we put in practice? How do we essentially navigate the world with this armor and use it efficaciously in our spheres of influence in the places where we live and breathe and go? And we find, like we said, prayer and petition. And there's like kind of these qualifying or these separation statements that bring greater degree of clarity to what that means. So there's praying at all times. And then when should you pray at all times? How should you pray in the Spirit? And then with all that in view, we talked about perseverance in the last episode. You should definitely check that out. But now it would be one thing to say, like, keep it to yourself. Pray that God would, in fact, come and rally you, that he supports you, that you would persevere, that his grace would be made present in your life, and that your weakness would be filled up with his strength. And you could end it there, and that would be fantastic. So I find it interesting that Paul turns it really quickly and says, with this petition for all the saints.
Yeah.
So he's definitely calling us here into something that I think maybe we might ask, how do we know that this kind of thing is missing in our world? If we love each other as Christians, if there's a lack of love, I think it does stem from this particular passage, practicing this particular thing. That this idea of interceding, as Paul is talking about here, making this petition, is I think imploring the divine grace and mercy on and in behalf of others. It's basically saying that God would put on Christ for others, starting with everybody, specifically here the saints, but starting with everybody. So are you as surprised as I am? Well, not necessarily surprised, but do you find it kind of a lovely twist that Paul puts this in this passage right at the tail end?
Yeah. I think I'm probably going to get a bunch of like emails about this. I can't think off the top of my head of any verse that commands us to pray for ourselves. Like I think the Bible teaches that we should go to God and we should cast our cares upon him. And I suppose that casting our cares upon Christ and asking, seeking God, give us our daily bread, the Lord's Prayer, the model prayer, like asking God to meet our needs, I suppose, is a form of praying for ourselves.
Sure.
Although I don't know that I would phrase it that way. But I can think of many verses that encourage us or command us to pray for others and to pray with others. And I think, when I think about this passage, right, the first part is, this is the nature of the battle. We talked about that. Here are all of the tools that are given to you. Take up all of these tools, take up this full set of equipment. And then here is the means by which you use that equipment, right? We think about the armor of God almost as like the tools themselves. That's fine. But the using of the tools is found in this action of praying at all times in the Spirit. And the primary thing that, at least in this passage, that Paul is telling us to pray for is to make supplication for all the saints. So the picture that we have is that we have this battle and we're given this tool set to fight this battle. But the way that we fight this battle is not by engaging for our own sake or on our own behalf, but engaging in this spiritual battle for the other Christians around us in our lives, right? All the saints totally. But I think by extension, or maybe by reduction, I guess, we should be spending focused time on a regular basis praying for the concentric circle model of saints in our lives, the people in your immediate church, the people in your immediate family, the people in churches in your area that are outside of your local congregation. It is a little bit surprising, but I think it's surprising not because it's somehow like a unique thing in the Bible. I think it's surprising because of the context of kind of like our Western culture of individualism, We are
Right.
so focused at times on like ourselves and our own needs and our individual salvation and personal evangelism. We lose sight of the fact that the Bible very much is a communal book. It's very much about how we engage in and for and with God's people corporately, much more so than it is about how we conduct our individual relationship with Jesus Christ. It's not to like the exclusion of an individual relationship. We all have to have an individual covenantal relationship with God. But that covenantal relationship takes place within this context of this broader covenant that God has with his people, or a broader application of the one covenant that God has with his people. So it's sort of one of those passages that's a little bit of like, it's almost like offensive to your sensibilities, but that's not because of the strangeness of the verse. It's because of the strangeness of our sensibilities.
If nothing else, it reminds us that it's every Christian's duty to pray for others as well as for himself. I think what I find so unique in its placement here, because of course, you're right, I'm experiencing this, viewing it, interpreting it from my own cultural worldview, is that you're going through this great passage where you have all these pieces enumerated, marked up, their purpose is explicitly defined for you. You're supposed to put these on. And you might think at the end of that, okay, tell me what I need to do. How do I empower myself? Or how do I pray so that God empowers me to go do this? And the irony here is that God is saying through Paul, the way you do that is to pray for your neighbor, your brother or sister who is wearing the same armor in the same way that they also should be praying for you. So you're right. What it does is it throws us right back into our Father who's in heaven. It throws us back into the covenant people. It throws us back into this responsibility for being part of a family, and that family loving one another as first Christian duty, prays for one another. And part of that prayer is that all of these things that are reflected in the armor, all this protection, the victory, the wielding that sword, comes by the request, the intercession of someone else that by definition isn't you. So it does force us back in the community. So again, this is like another one of those things. I don't really love this cliche, but people use it like there's no Lone Ranger Christian. Like here again is proof positive that the family of God, the victorious family of God, the one that is fighting for Christ, the one that is sustained by Christ, those requests come predominantly and firstly from someone else, because we're always looking to love one another by praying one another. So it is this duty, like you said, that we have to undertake. Certainly, like the prayer without ceasing implies that, as you said in the Lord's Prayer, we're being given a model to ask God as a good father for everything that we need. But never does that preclude that we shouldn't also pair that almost immediately for prayers for the needs of others whom we know also need Christ and need his covering blood all the time. And again, this is directed at the saints. I mean, one could argue, though it's a little bit outside, it's not entirely germane to this passage, that of course we should be praying for God's renown, his exaltation to go throughout all the world. All people groups would know him, would come to know him, that this word would be delivered, that good news, the shodding of your feet with the preparation of the gospel, that there would be others going out preaching, all Roman style stuff. But here we're really talking about the saints. And that is because that is who this armor is for. That is who this armor is meant to equip.
Yeah. And the other thing I think that is something for us to consider in this verse that might not come across in English translations directly, but the word used here that gets translated as supplication, both earlier in verse 18 and now here in verse 18, it's the same word. And the word is a specific kind of request that has to do with making needs known. So when we talk about prayer, there's different kinds of prayer. There's different words for prayer. The most common word that gets translated as prayer itself is prosuke, and that has more to do with like worship. Prosuke is kind of like almost like a bowing down kind of word. It's not quite the same as that, but it's kind of like when you prosuke, you hear that you're facing yourself toward God, and you're making your needs you're not making your needs known. It's more about praising God and attributing worth to him than it is about making your needs known. But supplication is specifically about making your own needs known. But here you're not making your own needs known. You're making your brothers and sisters' needs known. You're making all the saints known. And in some ways there's this double effect, right? Your need that you're making known to God is that he would bless all of the saints. You're making supplication, which is to make your needs known, but the need you're making known is not actually your need, it's their needs. And I think this really speaks to the concept here. We've tried not to like harp too much on people who've preached sermons about the armor of God, that it's like this element means this, and this is how you fight in this battle. But in my experience, a lot of those kinds of sermons or sermon series that focus, like one sermon on what the belt of truth is and how you take up the belt of truth and how it functions in your life, it seems like they're missing the entire point here, that you're not a soldier of one, right? You're not the special ops guy who goes in by himself to take out the enemy. You're in, the picture here is like the Roman legion, right? You're in the phalanx along with your other fellow soldiers. And so the idea that like you're making everyone's needs known, that you're praying and you're supplicating God for all of the saints, that shows really in a very real sense, this is not about, like you said, there's no Lone Ranger Christians. There's no Green Beret Christians who are going in at their own, by themselves. This is an army that is taking up the armor of God together as a whole. It's not that I take up the armor of God myself and somehow I'm now a formidable opponent to fight the spiritual forces in the heavenly places, right? The church as a whole, taking up the armor of God, taking up the whole armor of God, the church as a whole opposes the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places, right? Christ empowers the church to oppose Satan's kingdom, not necessarily individual Christians. And I think that's a key takeaway from this. And this is one of those things, that takeaway is not something you would understand in the way that most of our English translations and understanding of these verbs and what these words mean really conveys. So this is why it's important to have good like commentary resources. You don't have to learn Greek, but reading a good commentary, whether it's Calvin or a Pillar, the Pillar commentary, or Matthew Henry, or there's many other good commentaries. Even a lot of the non-good commentaries are going to pull this kind of stuff out for you. Having good commentary resources and allowing the voices of the church of the past to speak to you and help you understand what these passages mean is so key, because this whole passage, we've talked about several different places where specific grammar and specific linguistic features key you into something that you might not see in English. So I just think that's a really interesting feature here, that what we're doing is we're making supplication. We're making our needs known, but we're making our needs known on behalf of the other saints, and they're presumably doing it for us. So it is this picture of the group, the whole people of God coming together, praying for each other, taking up this spiritual armor in that prayer and wielding it against the spiritual forces of darkness. That's the picture we have here. Not this idea of like me as an individual taking up the armor of God and like conquering the gates of hell myself. It's the church that the gates of hell do not prevail against, not just an individual Christian.
Right. I think that's exactly the point that Paul is making. There's a reminder, of course, embedded in all this, that there is no such thing as an army of one. Like even the U.S. Army knows that. When that used to be there, it was a relatively short-lived recruiting slogan, Army of One, until, and I don't think it takes any great insight to realize this, they were like, well, that goes against actually what the army is.
The definition of the word army. Yeah,
exactly. Not only definitionally was it really oxymoronic, but this idea that they want, of course, when you're in the army, you're vouchsafing your safety, your well-being to somebody else. It's nothing less in the Christian life, which is a little bit scary and daunting. Yeah. And this is why, again, we've talked about God's family, of course, not being a natural relation, but a supernatural relation, because it does transcend, that God holds it together. And so when the body of Christ is functioning rightly, it necessarily means that we are praying for one another. And I think as I was listening to you, what really jumped out to me is in us making this point that really in these verses, you're getting, all the practical application we really need here. We talked last time about how when we get in the rhythm of understanding what this means, we actually are practicing this praying at all times in the Spirit, that of course those prayers shape us. They also refine us. They distill down our doctrinal positions. They really fire up our convictions according to the scriptures. And in addition to that, they just make us practiced Christians, or Christians that are able to engage the world practically with their theology. So this is one of those places, because if you are well practiced in your prayer life of being concerned for others, one, that's going to change how you literally feel about the others in your midst, even or maybe especially if you find them sometimes annoying or grating or difficult, that when you undertake an endeavor to pray for them, it just changes everything. But in addition to that, it makes you fair-sighted. It opens your eyes and allows you to practice prayer in both real time and informal, segregated, separated ways when it's scheduled. So for instance, if our friends, if the people in our churches of our loved ones are under any afflicting circumstances, then we should endeavor to pray for them
Yeah.
with a particular regard to those circumstances. Is somebody sick? Pray that God, by his grace, and if it be his good pleasure, would heal them. If there is confusion or strife in their life, pray that he would release them from that or give them the strength to see them through that difficult place. This is where I think we as Christians have the greatest place to step forward in our lives with one another. And that is to, when we say, I will pray for you, that we don't just make a mental note and do it once or twice, but that we make a firm commitment to make that happen, because we are side by side in the battle with one another. And that is exactly how we essentially win the war of this lifetime, where all of these flaming darts are coming toward us. I am praying that my neighbors would be embattled and emboldened in that process, and that I myself would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder because somebody else is praying the same for me. There's also, and this is the last thing I'll say before I take a breath, there is, I think, in here something about, I'm trying to think the words to say this exactly. Maybe you've been at a place in your life where you've really just been beaten down. Maybe the battle has been long and protracted, and the fight that you're in seems like totally intractable, and you're exhausted. You don't know how to pray anymore. It feels like, to use another cliche I don't really love, your prayers are bouncing back off the ceiling towards you. And in that moment, what you desperately need, whether you realize it or not, is somebody else to pray for you, to pray the things that either you wish you could pray or you lack total strength or discipline to pray, or the things which you couldn't even put into words, that somebody by the power of the Holy Spirit prays in your midst or privately. That is exactly what you need. That, I think, is also what Paul is driving at here. It's this idea that we will be exhausted in the battle. We will need support and we will need helps. And that helper, the Holy Spirit, comes and brings that help through the prayers of others. Everybody is being benefited from this quote unquote model of praying. And I do think it makes complete sense that Paul now brings it up to us. I agree with you from where we started, which was that we have to reorient ourselves to this. And I think part of that starts with each of us making a commitment to say, I'm guessing lots of churches publish prayer lists. That might be if you have a physical bulletin there. In my church, we have prayer requests that come out, I think, by email, I would say almost daily. And I would say I'm embarrassed at how often I look at those and it seems more like a news feed than something that I'm actually taking before God in this way, where I'm convicted that it is my incumbent responsibility as a part of this family to be involved in making this very firm, powerful, and highly convicted intercession on behalf of these other loved ones. Not just because there will be a day when I will also need that myself. Of course, there is, in a sense, every day that we need that. But that when things happen to us, when the world turns in a way that's unexpected and beyond what we would desire and calls us to suffer, that what we need in that time of battle is the help of everyone else, because we're in it together. So I think Paul is right on here. And I really, until we started going through this, didn't really catch the gravity and the weight that comes at the end of this little section.
Yeah.
And I actually think it's back end loaded as opposed to front end loaded.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to read this from Calvin, because I think there's the dynamic you're talking about where it's almost like we're so beaten down from the battle, we can't pray. And so our brothers and sisters come along. I don't always want to bring in Stoic quotes in this, but there's this really great quote in Marcus Aurelius where he basically says something along the lines of so you need someone to help you. What is it? What is it if you do? Like, who cares if you need some help? But the idea that we at times need someone else to pray because we find ourselves incapable of praying, that's certainly here. But the flip side of that too is that at times we find it difficult to pray because we don't feel that we have immediate needs to pray for in our own lives.
Yes.
So here's what Calvin says. He says, there's not a moment of our life at which the duty of prayer may not be urged by our own wants, right? So he's saying at all times in life, we should be able to pray just because of our own needs. But quoting again, he says, but unremitting prayer may likewise be enforced by the consideration that the necessities of our brethren ought to move our sympathy. And when is it that some members of the church are not suffering distress and needing our assistance? If at any time we are colder or more indifferent about prayer than we ought to be, because we do not feel the pressure of immediate necessity, right? Those moments where we feel like things are going great, and so we don't feel like we need to pray because our own life is together. Quoting it, he says, let us instantly reflect how many of our brothers are worn out by varied and heavy afflictions, are weighed down by sore perplexity, or reduced to the lowest distress. If reflections like these do not rouse us from our lethargy, we must have hearts of stone. What Calvin is saying here is that what Paul is saying here is that our spiritual responsibility is to pray for the saints. But that responsibility, as it always is when God gives us a responsibility, also comes with it a blessing. When we reason, when we observe and we reflect on and we understand our requirement to pray for all the saints who are in any circumstance, it is not only a responsibility, but it moves us to prayer, which is, of course, communion with God, which is, of course, our highest good, and our highest enjoyment of God comes in that communion. It is not just a responsibility, but it is a blessing to pray for all of the saints, because it moves us to further and closer communion with God, and it moves us to further and closer communion with each other, because we've said it before, like it's really hard to stay mad at someone when you're actively praying for them.
Right.
That's a feature that's going on here. And I think that Calvin just puts that so beautifully. If reflections like these, that is reflections on the needs and the distress of our brothers and sisters, if reflections like these do not rouse us from our lethargy, we must have hearts of stone, right? To connect this to our earlier argument or our earlier conversation, if we do not see the need to pray for our own lives, our own physical needs, our own spiritual needs, maybe thinking about the plight of the unborn who are being murdered and being disregarded, maybe that ought to move us to prayer. If we're and maybe just to give a little bit of a head nod to the somewhat valid point that the person makes, that there are other groups of people that need our prayer, right? If we are not moved to pity and compassion for those who are maybe through fault of their own, maybe not through fault of their own, or not entirely through fault of their own, are broken and stuck in sinful, addictive lifestyles. If we're not moved to prayer for those people, because Calvin goes on to say, are we to pray for unbelievers only? He says, though the apostle states the claims of the godly, he does not exclude others. So Calvin here is saying, like, not only do we pray for all the saints, but not only the saints, the unbelieving coworker that sits in the next cubicle, they have a need that you don't. And if you don't see the need to pray for your own needs, perhaps you will see the need to pray for theirs, or to pray for the church member who just suffered a loss, whose mother, friend, son, child just died, or the coworker who is so close to the kingdom of God, and maybe instead of taking time to argue theology with them, you actually just take time to pray for them. Like, that's what this is about. That's how we win and fight this battle, is not through some corporeal battle, through some fleshly battle. It's a spiritual battle, and the spiritual tools that God gives us are wielded through these kinds of prayers. So this has been I almost wish that we had done this series immediately following the Lord's Prayer series, because it's such a natural next step off of what we were talking about. And that's just God's providence, right? We didn't come up with this series. This was an idea given to us by viewers or listeners. But it's such a natural next step to talk about what is it that the battle is and how do we execute that? Well, we execute it through prayer. So I'm just stoked. We are going to wrap up the series next week. We've got just a tiny bit more that I think we want to cover, having to do with Paul's kind of like specific exhortation about the gospel and about his own ministry. I think we will have some things to say about that. But I'm just this series has really engaged me to think about prayer and the spiritual battle in my own spiritual life in a different way than I have before, and I really, really am excited about it.
Agreed. It's a little bit nice to come to this end and have some real, I think, hopefully deep conversation about what all those elements of the armor mean and how do we use them. Because, like you said, there's a lot of great things that have been written and spoken about regarding these pieces. But now that you are equipped, and of course, the whole point of an armor and a weapon is to actually use it, to wield it effectively, and to go out into the world and do something with it. And I love that these verses are forcing us in that conversation. And loved ones, you're all reasonable people. I hope that you'll continue to process that. Think about your own conviction, what it means for us as Christians, what kind of incumbent duty and responsibility do we have to pray for one another. As we close, Tony, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that, again, this episode has been brought to you by Tony Arsenal Books. And if I can just put one more plug in, because I don't want you to have to move those books either. And again, think about like, I'm just going to make the joke, even though, okay, let me say this. First off, I love animals of all kinds. They are creations that God has made for us to enjoy and to respect and to honor. And, you know, of course, I'm a fan of dogs in particular. Cats I have mixed feelings about, but I still respect them and kind of, I see you there, but I'd like you to stay there kind of situation. With that said, all I was thinking about with what I was about to say, this impassioned plea for coming and rescuing the books was like those like Sarah McLachlan tracked commercials where it's like, you know, it's like very sad and it's showing, you know, animals. Again, I'm not taking anything away from that. I'm just saying, listen, loved ones, these books, they need a home. And I'm looking at the list right now. I have it pulled up and there's some fire books on here. I'm actually surprised some of these books are on here. So things like Rediscovering the Holy Spirit, Pilgrim Theology, you got some Horton representation that's coming in real strong. The Whole Counsel of God, all 3 volumes, 1, 2, 3. You can get them all. And we're talking about like 25% off discounted prices, all kinds of great things on here. I'm going to be checking out this list and I encourage you to do the same. One of the places you go to interact with this is go to do all of yourselves a favor. If you want a fun place on the internet that is with some like-minded brothers and sisters who are listening, tracking along, joining the conversation, talking about books, talking about memes, or I guess you don't talk about memes, you put them out there. I'm an old man now. Go to t.me/Reformed Brotherhood, t.me/Reformed Brotherhood. That's going to provide you a link to a messaging app called Telegram. It's our version of a chat room that is a really glorious and nice piece of the interwebs where you can just hang out with us and others like us. And that was probably the first place where you would have had access to this particular list of fire books.
It's true.
So if you're missing fire books in your life, if you want to get books that have been stamped with Tony's insignia for his library, hey, do you have one of those stamps so that like if you were to die tragically, the Lord would just arrest you, take you home, right? Like Enoch style or otherwise, like just take you out of this world. And somebody's going through your library and they stumble on some books. Do you know the stamp I'm talking about?
The heresy one?
Yes.
I do not have one of those. No. I don't think I have anything in my library that I would actively put a stamp like that on, though.
I mean, that's good. Often when you talk about, there's good reason to have some materials
Yeah.
that you're processing, and they may be either far or wide in terms of how close they are to the center of the truth. But, you know, I do have like somewhere around here, I do have like, you know, the Book of Mormon, for instance. And I forgot about the Quran somewhere. So I suppose like somebody, but I do have like a Universalist book here somewhere in the midst. Like I think it's called If Grace is True. And that I was reading for the purpose of a study on something. And maybe I should write in that, like, you know, how dare you, or this is not me, or,
Yeah.
you know, held under duress. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I'm really not that worried about it. But I do love, and I think, can you get that at Missionalware? Maybe they only have the book stamp that is, you know, like your insignia. This is from my library, but I know you can go.
I know there is one. Yeah, I think the farthest from center or farthest from orthodoxy thing that I have, and it's not all that far from orthodoxy, is I have some dispensationalism books. Like dispensationalism is not a heresy. I would say it's a mild heterodoxy in many cases, but and I have like William Lane Craig's Philosophical Foundations, 2nd edition. That one is like, there's some straight up heresy in there. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have anything that I would even put that stamp on.
I didn't see that William Lake Craig book on the list.
It's not on there yet. Yeah, I'm only about halfway through my library. So seriously, people should look at it now, but they should come back in a week and see what else is on there, and then a week later than that. So yeah. Jesse is far more excited about this book sale than I've been.
Stoked.
Unfortunately, I guess maybe I should have talked to him about my marketing strategy before I.
I'm super stoked. I have this term. I don't know if I've used this with you, but I've used this with other people because my wife knows that like almost any book I'm going to take, when we go to the library and they have that shelf out there, it's like the free books, things that are being taken out of circulation. She literally has to be like, nope, nope, nope. As we walk through, like, I'll be like, just let me take a look. She's like, nope, we have no room, no more books. So I always call those rescue books. Like, I want to rescue all the books. I really have a hard time if somebody's like, oh, I'll just get rid of it. I want to be like, whoa, let me see what it is first. So I have so many books because I love them all. And I want them all to be in good, loving homes.
I will say this, right? So at this, and then we'll wrap up. At this conference I'm at today, right? I made an announcement at the business meeting because it's the ETS meeting. We have a business meeting at lunch. We have to vote on resolutions and stuff. I made an announcement at the business meeting that I was downsizing my library and provided people with the link. And at the seminary that the conference was at, they have a free bookshelf. And I was over there looking at the free bookshelf, and a friend of mine who was at the conference walks up and he said, "Don't forget that you were downsizing." And I was like, yeah, I know. There is, at this conference, the publishers send books for the book tables, but they don't send books to sell. They send samples. So at the end of the conference, everybody gets to take usually a couple books. I didn't take any because I left early, but I'm sure my buddy, we call him Seven Barrel. I'm sure that my buddy Seven Barrel
was there.
Yeah, he's on the steering committee. I'm sure that he will grab a couple books and bring them home for me. So those may go straight back on the list of books I'm selling. It's hard to tell, but probably not.
That's great. By the way, one of the most epic nicknames of all time, in my opinion. I think it's a great name. And it kind of was born out of a podcast, not ours.
It's true.
But it was, sometime we should get Seven Barrel on. If you all would like to hear Seven Barrel, if you're just curious about this person, and you ought to be, you should definitely email us at info@reformedbrotherhood.com. It's request something for a topic. If there's something on your mind, something you'd like to talk about, or a conversation you've been having, and maybe want some two anonymous non-AI voices from the internet to weigh in or just dialogue with you on that, you can hit us up at info@reformedbrotherhood.com. You can go to t.me/reformedbrotherhood, and you can go buy some books from Tony. That's the last time, I promise.
Until next week, at least. Well, Jesse, until next week, honor everyone.
Love the brotherhood, buy some books.